It is Saturday, just after noon Eastern time, right here on the East Coast. It is time for the NASCAR DFS strategy show right here on Awesemo.com as we get you ready for tomorrow's Bank of America Roval 400. Phil, how you doing on this Saturday afternoon, man?
Great, Jason. I don't know how to put this, but for the first time in what I can remember in my entire life watching NASCAR, we may actually have a road course race in the rain. I mean, it may sound silly to some people, but I'm pretty pumped about the prospects of actually seeing this.
Awesome. I was reading some of the stuff you had over at Awesemo.com this week as we'll kind of break this one down. Of course, as always, what we kind of like to start the show off with every week is talking about roster construction and how we're going to develop not just our GPP lineups, but also how we're going to develop our cash lineups. So talk to our listeners about your strategy heading into this race tomorrow.
Right. For cash, I'm looking at a single dominator. We've got so much place differential. You remember the lineups are starting grids based off of what happened the week before with finishing position, fastest laps, and all of that stuff. So, I mean, we've got lots of drivers in the 20s and beyond that are giving us place differential. So I think for cash games, you're looking at just a singular guy that you're going to pair with all this place differential. In tournaments, you can take the same approach, or you can add in a second dominator. In last year's optimal lineup for the Roval race, it was a two dominator optimal lineup. I believe we had this. We had the same thing at the Daytona Road Course. Of course, this all boils down to what are your expectations for these drivers like Ryan Blaney, like Jimmy Johnson, like Christopher Bell. Because if you don't think that these guys can matriculate their way through the field and finish with top 5 or even top 10 finishes, then that's necessarily going to mean that you're going to need a second dominator in your lineups to get to the top scores.
Yeah, no. In terms of, obviously, you mentioned about that single dominator in cash, because I know you wrote in one of your articles this week about having two dominators. So kind of talk to us a little bit about that aspect of in terms of GPP, though.
Yeah, the idea of just going a single dominator in cash is that we're going to have one driver that's probably going to lead at least a third, maybe even a half of the race. So you definitely want that cornerstone in your lineup. But we've got so much place differential to build around in this that, you know, they just give you so much better of a floor that I think it's just a better idea to take the floor that these guys give you, throw them in your lineup instead of trying to put in a second dominator that, you know, let's say that a Martin Truex, a Brad Keselowski, a Denny Hamlin, you know, name the driver that you think is going to lead laps, is only going to lead somewhere in the 15 to 20 lap range, maybe get, you know, a handful of fastest laps. Well, you're only talking about 10 to 15 extra points for a driver that's going to be in the high 9K to the 10K range versus these guys that can get 20, maybe even 30 place differential points.
Yeah, I know that's something you wrote about this week about place differential, because, you know, when I was putting together, you know, my sheet this morning with, you know, the prices and where, you know, drivers were starting, you know, the one thing that I really looked at, and we'll get into that tier 3 later on in the show, but it was like, man, that tier 3, there's a lot of guys in that tier that I go, there's some potential for some great point differential.
Yeah, and you know, DraftKings makes us pay for this place differential, but thankfully, you know, they really didn't boost these guys up too much. Where, you know, you can only get a couple. They have kind of laid it before us to just take whoever we want and mix and match these guys. It's really not a tough week to build lineups.
In terms of dominators, you mentioned about the difference between, you know, cash and GPP. Obviously, is it kind of the usual names that you're looking at in terms of dominators?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's, well, okay, Denny's on the pole, and I could not believe my eyes when Denny's basically snuck away with that win last week. That was, you know, it was typical. It's 2020. Denny hangs around in the back all day avoiding the wrecks, and on the last lap, he swoops in and steals the win. What's new? You've got Kevin Harvick, who has been pretty good at road races throughout his career, but then you've got some of the guys that we know have a better ability when it comes to these road courses, like your Chase Elliott's, your Martin Truex Juniors. You might not consider Brad Keselowski one of those guys, but he was well on his way to winning the inaugural Roval race a couple of years ago. And then you got to throw Kyle Busch into this discussion, because he's been a pretty good road racer himself. Not here at the Roval for the last 2 years that they've been running here, with finishes of 37th and 32nd, but the ability is definitely there, and maybe more than ever, the motivation.
So I mentioned to you this before the show. So I only did one NASCAR lineup last week. I did a single entry, and the winning lineup had two guys under 5,000. Hoff,
Yeah.
who got almost 52 points, 51 and a half, and Ware at almost 41 points.
I know that it's a road. It was a super speedway race, and anything can happen. But I mean, you guys were following my line of thinking that it was going to be a clean race, and therefore you couldn't play these back marker guys because they're really not going to move up. I mean, my apologies. I definitely lost money last week going along that line of thinking. It blew my mind how aggressive they were being so early in the race. And then you go to the second stage, and Clint Bowyer basically turned Jimmy Johnson to try to work himself forward just to get some stage points. I mean, everything that I thought that race would be, it got flipped on its head. It was quite the crazy outcome.
Yeah, it's but we're here to talk about tomorrow's race, 2:30 Eastern Time, lock time. So after you get your NFL lineups in, you can get your NASCAR lineups in, and you should just start go ahead reserving those contests so you get in those contests. But let's get right into tier number one here, Phil. We a second straight week we have no drivers in the 11K range on DraftKings, but we do have 4 drivers in the 10K range. Ryan Blaney starting 24th. He's 10,900. Chase Elliott, who is starting second, he's 10,600. Martin Truex Jr., who's starting 7th, he's 10,300. Brad Keselowski starting 3rd, he's 10,100. On the FanDuel side, Blaney's 12,000, Elliott 13,500, Truex Jr. 13,200, and Keselowski 11,600.
Yeah, we've got basically a guy that you could put in there for as a cash game play, or that you could say, well, he's going to eventually find his way to the lead, that being Ryan Blaney. He is our most expensive driver here on DraftKings at 10-9. Now, is Blaney a must-play in cash? No.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Blaney has to do certain things in this race in order to pay off that salary, and that's not just pick up 20 spots of place differential. I think in order for him to be optimal, you're going to need him to eventually get to the actual lead and knock off maybe 5 to 10 laps, get some fastest laps. You're going to need more from Blaney to be optimal than just gaining place differential. Chase Elliott, he is the favorite. He's the guy that I want in the majority of my lineups. I will tell you, when it came to my own personal lineups, this looked a lot like a super speedway race, where I said, okay, this race always has a ton of cautions. People can end up wrecking out by no fault of their own because of something that happens in front of them or a driver behind them. We've got the added impact of rain, which, I mean, we don't know what that's going to, what impact that's going to have on these
Mm-hmm.
drivers. So, I mean, lots of things could happen. So it's probably a good week to cap ownerships at 45% at the most, maybe 50%. But after I made my lineups, I still ended up at 60% Chase Elliott. He's been so good in these road races, especially these road races that involve using the backstretch, the actual latter portion of the oval itself. We're talking about 3 straight wins here at the Roval, won last year, 6th place in 2018. He won the inaugural Daytona road course race. He's been so good. I mean, the talent is there. He's there on the front pole. All that he basically has to do is just beat Denny Hamlin off the line, and we're looking at a driver that could easily lead half to more of this race.
Yeah, I will tell you, when I was putting together, I was doing some dummy crunches this morning. Ryan Blaney was by far on FanDuel. He was the number 1 driver for me. He was right there on top on DraftKings as well. I mean, I look at that starting 24th, a place differential. If he can get, if you think he's going to, finish in the top 10, how do you avoid him?
Yeah, I mean, and this is a good discussion. On DraftKings, I have trouble justifying putting Blaney in my lineups. But when it comes to FanDuel, because remember, FanDuel's not awarding you fastest lap points. This is all about laps led. So if we're looking, God, at really not that many laps led points that are going to be available tomorrow. So you need these guys with high finishing position and place differential options. And Blaney's that perfect guy to put in there. I don't know if it'll be optimal, but you could make a case for just a place differential lineup. Not like a super speedway lineup where it's just, who cares what I have left over, but you could make a real case on FanDuel for just chasing place differential and finishing position upside.
In terms of Truex Jr. and Kozlowski, what's your thoughts on them and paying up for these guys?
I like Keselowski. You remember the first Roval race, he was well on his way to winning the race, but with a couple of laps to go, ended up driving into turn one, took 13 other cars with him in that pile up. I believe he led the most laps on that day. Came back last year, ended up finishing fifth here. If I look at all of the road course races together since 2018, Brad's been good. Finishes of 13th, 5th, 9th, 18th, 31st, 17th, and 13th. So, I mean, I believe the upside is there because his average finish is 15.1. So, he's probably not going to carry as much ownership as he should. Like, let me look here at our projections. Yeah, we've got Brad at 5%. So, I mean, if you are looking for a guy that you can just sprinkle into a couple of lineups with actual winning upside, Brad's probably the guy that you want at the top of the board. Truex himself finishes the road course races going back to 2018, 3rd, 7th, 2nd, 1st, 14th. That was when he was a dog leg away from winning the inaugural Roval race before Jimmy Johnson spun him, 2nd and 1st. So, I mean, let's just say that Jimmy doesn't spin him. We're looking at three wins. His worst finish is a 7th. That's a guy that if you don't play Chase as your singular dominator, then the next guy down in your lineup should probably be Truex to me.
The question we got in here from Wyatt already, and we can kind of correlate here what we've been talking about. He's asking, who do you think leads the beginning portion of the race? Do you look at Chase Elliott and Kozlowski since they're starting 2nd and 3rd as who you might think could get that?
Yeah, I think really for me, the debate is how badly does Chase want this versus how badly does Denny want this? Because, I mean, Denny got his win. Denny, he was going to go to the next round regardless because of points. But, I mean, last week's win, it's got him locked into the 3rd round. So, I mean, he doesn't have the motivation to try to outrace Chase here at the very beginning. Now, Chase is pretty well safe with his points, but I think Chase wants to just get the assurance of a win and start knocking down these laps led. Definitely go after that first stage point to add on to his playoff total. So I think for myself, the two guys that I would look at would definitely be Truex and Chase, but you could add Brad into that discussion because of his starting position.
This is a NASCAR DFS strategy show right here on Awesemo.com. Before we get into the Tier 2 drivers, do want to let you know about Awesemo Plus, where you can get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for nearly every DFS sports out there with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. This includes full access to all the premium content tools at Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, and much more. Only looking to play now, and if you're only looking to play NASCAR, then you can sign up for a NASCAR weekly pass for only $9.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join now, Awesemo Plus today. There you see it on the left-hand side of the screen where you can sign up for a NASCAR weekly pass for $9.95, where you can, and as I always say, add Fantasy Cruncher. That will definitely help you out a lot as well. Now, Phil, as we look at tier number 2 here, we got Kevin Harvick starting 4th. He's 9,900 on DK. Denny Hamlin at the pole, 9,700. Kyle Busch, 9th, 9,500. Joey Logano, 8th, 9,300. Jimmy Johnson starting 30th at 9,100. Alex Bowman starting 5th, 9,000. Clint Boyer, 11th, 8,800. William Byron, 13th, 8,600. Kurt Busch starting 10th, 8,400. Eric Jones, 14th, 8,200. And Michael McDowell starting 31st at 8,100.
let's talk about Kyle first. Kyle has, he's definitely struggled this season, and we've talked about the comments that he's made about, he really didn't think that he was going to go advance to the next round. He made those before Las Vegas, but I mean, he clarified himself and said, just because I don't see myself advancing to the next round doesn't mean that I'm not going to be going after it. So I mean, like I said, Kyle's a good road racer. Dating back to 2018, he's got 3 top 5 finishes. Now his averages are dragged down by 37th at the Daytona Road Course race, and then 37th last year. But I mean, for his career, he's been a good road course racer. He's a guy that you add in if you're wanting exposure to a cheaper driver that has motivation, but it's probably more, I hate to say, it's probably more narrative based than anything. The guy that really surprises me, and when I look at our ownership projections, is we've got Kevin Harvick projected as the highest owned driver. Now, Kevin has been good at road course races. I mean, you can't argue against that. His setup was just not where it needed to be in the Daytona road course race. He fell back immediately after starting on the pole that race, ended up finishing 17th. He should have finished back in the 30s because his car was just, it was set up so poorly by the 4 team. They ended up making some changes, and then he kind of raced his way back up to 17th. But before that, 3rd last year in the Roval race, 7th at Watkins Glen, 6th at Sonoma, and then you go the year before that, 9th in the Roval race, 10th at Watkins Glen, and then 2nd at Sonoma. So, I mean, trust the pedigree, trust the speed. Harvick should be part of your Dominator pool, and we've already talked about Denny Hamlin. He starts on the pole. The pole sitters, they lead laps here at the Roval. They end up, they've fallen back the last couple of years, but they're still bringing home top 5 finishes. And maybe Denny does enough at that depressed salary to end up being optimal.
Looking at some other drivers here, Jimmy Johnson starting 30th, point differential. That kind of sticks out to me here.
Yeah, I mean, and Jimmy still has a few of these tracks where he hasn't lost his edge and he hasn't lost his skill, and road courses have been that. He finished 4th in the Daytona road course, and then you go back beyond that, 9th in this race last year, 19th at Watkins Glen, but then 12th at Sonoma, and then 8th in the 2018 version of the Roval. So, I mean, I feel like we can basically give Jimmy 20 place differential spots kind of as a ceiling, maybe 25, but then on the lower end, you're probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 15. Jimmy's a guy that you should play in cash above Ryan Blaney because, I mean, you're getting cheaper. You're getting more place differential at a cheaper salary. So if it's a toss-up between who of those guys that you start your lineups with, it's got to be Jimmy Johnson. Great play on FanDuel. Pair Blaney and Jimmy Johnson together on FanDuel, but on a 1v1, take the nearly $2,000 savings and play Jimmy instead.
As I look at the salaries on DraftKings opposed to FanDuel, I guess the one that kind of does stick out to me in terms of this tier would be Eric Jones. He's essentially the same price on both sites, $8,200 on DK, $8,000 on FanDuel. What's your thoughts on the different platforms and how you see it kind of faring out for him?
Yeah, Eric, he's got a pretty good history as a road course racer. He's got a couple of stinkers in there. He finished dead last in this race last year. He was one of those wreck tragedies. And then oddly in the 2018 version of this race, he finished 30th. But I mean, that was the first time anybody had really seen the layout of this track. So I'm not going to fault him for that. But you look at everything else since 2018. Eric's finishes are 11th, 4th, 8th, 5th, and 7th. So you've got a top 5, top 10 caliber driver in this car. We talk about motivation. It was something that we kind of brought up last week about his motivation because he still hasn't officially landed a ride yet. Well, you look at his string of finishes the last couple of weeks. Let me pull this up here. 2nd, 8th, 3rd, 22nd, and 4th. So we're talking about 4 top 8 finishes out of the last 5 races. He needs to make a good impression on whoever still has a seat that's open. I think he's a guy that you should definitely consider for your GPP lineups. I think he starts a little too far forward for my taste in cash, considering these guys that are in the next tier below him. But he's a guy that I definitely love for tournaments.
I will tell you, as I look here at our ownership projections on DK, Michael McDowell at 8,100 at he's right there at the top. He's one of the top projected owned drivers. So what's your thoughts on him and that ownership that we're seeing with him?
Yeah, he's another guy that should just be an auto play in your cash lineups. Now, I mean, when I say auto play, I mean it's one of those things when you look at the salary, when you look at the place differential, you look at the pedigree of who this driver is in this type of race. I mean, it's just quick. It's like, yeah, that's a guy that I want in my lineups. McDowell, even though he's in cheaper equipment, when it comes to these road races, his skill shines through. Mm-hmm. His last 7 finishes have gone 10th, 12th, 16th, 25th, 18th, 18th, 21st. So, I mean, we're talking about a top 15 driver starting 31st. I mean, yeah, we never pay this kind of salary for Michael McDowell, but I think the justification is definitely there because of the place differential and the ceiling that he has.
In terms of anyone else in this tier that you haven't already talked about, Clint Boyer, I guess he made the news this week about his future next season of going to the broadcast booth. He's 8,800 on DraftKings, 11,300 on FanDuel. Alex Bowman starting 5th, 9,000 on DK, 11,000 on FanDuel.
Yeah, there may be some temptation to play Bowman because his finishes here at the Roval have gone 2nd and 4th. But let me go back over here to the Roval super sheet. It's so weird. His average finish in these 2 races is 3rd, but his average running position is 17.7. That is a gigantic gap. I think that Bowman has just found a way with these late cautions to move his way forward. And he's a good road racer in his own right, but something is happening in these races where he is just immediately falling back, and then by some late strategy or just missing cars and not being in part of these wrecks, he's able to move his way forward. So you might consider Bowman as a GPP play for a guy that can get you a top 5 finish. But I mean, if you're in that boat, and this is only on DraftKings because at 11,000 you can't pay that for Bowman. But if you're in that boat on DraftKings, I think I'd much rather play Boyer, who I know can move up. He's a very good road racer in these 2 Roval races. His finishes have gone 4th and 3rd. You look at what he did at the Daytona road course. He came in 6th. He's a good driver, and it's a shame that I think he's basically being forced to retire. Mm-hmm. But for this weekend, I really like him definitely as a GPP play.
Of course, you are watching the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show, and if you can't catch us live on YouTube, you can get us on demand as part of the Awesemo Podcast Network. All you got to do is go to awesemo.com, and right there at the top of the page, you'll see where you can click the link and to get to your favorite podcasting platform. Maybe if you're out and about on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning, you can listen to the show to get you ready for Sunday's NASCAR race. Now, as we move on to tier number 3, I mentioned earlier on the show about various drivers with point differential in this tier. Matty D starting 20th, Eric Amarola starting 12th, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. starting 38th, Christopher Bell 35th, Tyler Reddick 16th, Austin Dillon 6th, Cole Custer 28th, Chris Buescher 21st, Daniel Suarez 34th, Bubba Wallace 26th, Ryan Newman 15th, Matt Kenseth 23rd, and John Hunter Nemechek starting 19th. I want to start off with a question from James, and this was about Amarola and saying, is he a safe play?
That is a really good question. I don't have him highlighted for anything right now. On FanDuel, he's 9,500. I wouldn't touch that with a broom. It's just an elevated price where you're not going to get much of anything for your bang for your buck. But at 7,800, I suppose he makes a good pivot off of this Christopher Bell and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. chalk. But God, you're going to need a string of events to happen where Almirola outscores the likes of McDowell, DiBenedetto, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Christopher Bell, just because of their place differential versus his.
In terms of some other drivers, we got another question. This was in relation to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Christopher Bell from Wyatt. He goes, how important are Stenhouse and Bell to have in our lineups? Are these free squares that we are forced to jam in?
In cash, that answer is definitely yes. Like, even if you don't like these guys, like, I don't care what the weekend is, playing Ricky Stenhouse Jr. as chalk, that's always an occasion to make me want to go back later and rework my lineups. But I mean, starting 38th, and he's only 7,700 because I mean we've seen Ricky more expensive in safer races with a similar place differential. So and to be frank, Ricky really hasn't been that bad in road course races. His last 7 finishes in road courses have gone 16th, 17th, 15th, 21st, a worst of 37th, and then 16th and 18th. So, I mean, kind of on the surface, Ricky's probably a 15th through 20th place driver. And if he's going to give you 20 to 25 positions at 7,700, you've got to take advantage of that. And Christopher Bell, this will be his first time seeing the track in a Cup car, but he has raced this event both times in the Xfinity Series, so he should be accustomed to the layout of this track. So, that's a further point if you're kind of worried about guys like Bell, Reddick, Nemechek, and then some of these other cheaper guys that we'll get into later. These guys have seen this track before in the Xfinity Series. They should know what to expect even without practice.
In terms of Matty D, who is his ownership is right up there, in the Bell and the Harvick. Talk about him here in starting 20th.
Matt's. I don't have Matt circled for cash or GPP as well. Like, I think because of his salary, it's going to be such a tough proposition for him to outscore these other guys. Now, he can get you some place differential, but I mean, we have to talk about what is Matt's real ceiling. You go back to last year's race, he finished 11th. The year before that, he finished 13th. His worst finish in the road courses has been at Watkins Glen in 2018. That was a 33rd. Everything else has been a top 15 with even a couple of top 10 finishes. So, I mean, Matt's going to need a top 10 to a 5th place finish in order for him to be optimal. And can he do that? Sure. But I think it's a whole lot easier once again for these guys like McDowell, Stenhouse, Bell to reach that same floor and then outscore him.
I want to bring up 2 drivers here in this tier, but this is more of a FanDuel aspect here because they are 4,000 and 4,500 on FanDuel. Nemechek is 4,500 on FanDuel, and Daniel Suarez is 4,000.
Oh my Lord! Okay, Nemechek starting 19th is a hard proposition for me. Mm-hmm. I know he saves you a bunch of money, but if you're there at 4,500, you just go down to the other guy that you mentioned, Daniel Suarez. Suarez seems genuinely happy that this race might be in the rain. Like, he is giddy. We've got a little narrative going into his factor. We found out this week that he is going to be the driver for a brand new startup team that is going to have an alliance with Richard Childress. So, he's got some momentum in his corner. He's got 34th starting position. So I would say whether you're looking at FanDuel or cash, FanDuel or DraftKings, that he is cash viable. And, this goes into another point that, I mean, the forecast could change and it could just be cloudy tomorrow. But if this is truly going to be like a downpour because of the remnants of Hurricane Delta making their way through the Carolinas, then navigating through that crap is going to be a lot about skill. And Suarez and his road course background racing in Mexico. Now, God knows that there probably weren't a lot of rain log races in Mexico that Suarez had to deal with. But if you're adding that layer of difficulty, I think that's going to play into Suarez's corner. And I think that really makes him viable, especially with that starting position.
Matt Kenseth, who is starting 23rd, 6,200 on DK, 6,000 on FanDuel, and we got a question, or I guess a question / comment about Matt Kenseth, where it says, "I think Matt Kenseth is a bit cheap. How do you feel about him?"
Yeah, Kenseth is all right, and he's in this weird area on kind of both on FanDuel and DraftKings, where if you like, let's just say for DraftKings' sake, if you go up, you've got Ryan Newman, but Newman's starting 15th, so Newman is really in a no man's land for me, and I really don't trust Newman in a road course race. And then we've already talked about John Hunter Nemechek. I really think because of his starting position that his legs have been cut out from underneath him. Then you go down, it's Corey LaJoie, and you look at his last three finishes in road course races, it's 32nd, 34th, and 32nd. So this really probably doesn't suit him. And you just keep going down the line. I think Kenseth, because of his starting position and the guys that he's around, he's probably the safest out of these guys. Like if you end up landing on him, I'm not going to hate it. Like he's not a guy I'm going out of my way to get to, but if you find yourself there, I think he's fine.
The driver with the best starting position in this tier is Austin Dillon, starting at 6, 7,200 on DK, 6,400 on FanDuel. What's your thoughts about Austin here tomorrow?
Austin is definitely hands off for me. This will be his first road race of the year. Remember, go back to the Daytona road course. He had to sit that one out because he was positive for COVID-19. That was when Cascarella got the start and looked like a roll beater in that 3 car. But when you look at Austin's numbers in road races, 23rd in this race last year, 31st at Watkins Glen, 24th at Sonoma. You go back to 2018, 39th in this race, 27th at Watkins Glen, 16th at Sonoma. I don't think he's good as a road course racer. Starting 6th, he's in a really tough position. Yeah, you're getting him at a discount, especially at FanDuel, but I just don't see any way that he becomes viable.
Four other drivers that we haven't really talked about in this tier. You got Tyler Reddick, 7,400, starting 16th. Cole Custer, starting 28th, 7,100 on DK. And Bubba Wallace, starting 26 at 6,500.
Reddick, if you're in this area and you're trying to get off of the Stenhouse and Bell chalk, then I think that pivoting to Reddick at 7,400 on DraftKings, that's a move you can make for tournaments. Same basic thing you can do with Cole Custer, but Cole is actually a little bit safer starting 28, so he gives you some place differential. I think kind of in this area outside of Stenhouse and Bell, my favorite driver, and I think that you can even make a case that he's cash viable, is going to be Chris Buescher. You look at the Daytona road course race, he started, I believe, in a similar position, 21st, worked his way up to 5th. You look at all of his finishes, and of course, these last 2 years, this was at JTG Doherty, everything that AJ Allmendinger would have taught him about road course races. His worst finish was 20th. Finished his 2 finishes in the Roval races have gone 18th and 17th. I believe Buescher's improved. He's got better equipment, more horsepower. I don't think that Buescher's going to repeat what he did at the road course, but I think that you can look at a top 12 finish for Buescher this weekend.
And then, of course, we'll get into tier number 4 here in a moment. Do want to let you know about our free premium content today over at Awesemo.com, and that is the NFL Premium Top Stack Tool. So as you're making those lineups here for your NFL DFS, you got to go over and check out that free premium content we have today. Of course, all throughout today and tomorrow, we'll have NFL coverage for you here as to help you prepare for these lineups. Now, as we look at tier number 4 here, we got Corey LaJoie starting 32nd, Ty Dillon starting 17th, James Davison 37th, Ryan Preece 18th, J.J. Yeley 33rd, Greg Galding 36th, Timmy Hill 27th, Joey Gase 29th, Brennan Poole 22nd, and Quinn Hoff 25th.
You'll never hear me say this again, maybe even for the rest of my life, but I think if you're in this area because you played Ryan Blaney in cash, I don't mind playing James Davison. I genuinely think that it might be okay, and especially for tournaments, like if you're in this area and you just need a punt play, then I mean, go hog wild with Davidson. This is the Daniel Suarez corollary. You're taking an actual driver that has grew racing in these road courses. I mean, this is a guy that came from the Indy Series. You know, he ended up he's from, I believe, either Australia or New Zealand, so he grew up racing in road courses around that area. He's got tons of experience making right turns in a car, as opposed to the rest of these guys that have done it maybe just twice a year for the last several years. He starts 37th. He's going to give you place differential. If it rains, it necessarily increases the odds that he could actually move up through the field if he keeps himself clean throughout this race. In the Daytona road course race, he started 38th. He finished 30th, so he picked up some place differential in that race, kind of doing the same thing. I don't hate James Davison this weekend. He's a guy that you definitely add to your tournament pool and maybe even cash if you are forced down in this area because you played Blaney.
Okay, so if James Davidson's the number one punt play in this tier, who's number two?
You know, I'm going to say that instead of messing with guys like Ryan Preece and Ty Dillon because of their starting position, Ty's been okay in these road course races. He finished 20th at Daytona. He finished 15th at the Roval race last year. But, I mean, his average starting position in these road course races has been 28.1. So he is starting way further forward than he's accustomed to. So I think he's probably destined to fall back about 5 to 10 spots and just kind of be stuck there the rest of the race. And I think the same thing is probably going to happen with Ryan Preece. So I'm going to get off of these guys. I don't want to play Corey LaJoie whatsoever. Instead, I'll play Gray Galding. I'll look at J.J. Yaley. And if you have to go down, I don't want to play Brennan Poole because he starts 22nd because he did so well last week. But God, you can consider Timmy Hill or Joey Gase. Like I said, these guys, they're not what you absolutely hope for, but they've got some place differential. They've got history with this track. They've raced here before. They've raced in at the Daytona road course. They should know what to expect. And if this is really going to be like another 10 to 12 caution wreck fest that we've seen in the past, then there's nothing stopping these guys from just kind of hanging out in the back, avoiding the wrecks, and picking up spots through attrition.
Of course, if you do have any questions on this race, line those up in YouTube, also on our premium Slack account. We'll get to those questions here momentarily. Andre, we'll get to your question. I know that's one of the questions we've not answered so far. No matter whether I'm doing NASCAR show, MMA show, MLB, NBA, I always talk about is when we're going into Fantasy Cruncher, and there are going to be players that we just say, man, just don't want them. We unclick them, don't even want them coming up in an optimizer. Is there anyone in this tier that you look at and you say, no, I'm unclicking that guy. I don't want any of them?
Yeah, below 6K, I'm definitely taking out Corey LaJoie. I might leave in Ty Dillon, but I am telling Fantasy Cruncher, I'm going to the ownership percentages, and I'm telling it, give me 5%. Give me 1 out of 20 lineups. Same thing with Ryan Preece. All the way down at the bottom, I'm marking out Brennan Poole. But the rest of these guys, I'm just going to say, if the projections and the rules that I've put into Fantasy Cruncher put me down in this area, then they're guys that I'm not actively trying to get away from. Now I'll look at those ownership percentages and, hope it didn't jam me in with 50% James Davison, because that's probably not a stake that I'm wanting to take. But we'll definitely go from there.
Of course, let's get into these listener questions. Going over to Slack here first. Hoodmaster, he's asking about tier 3 options, about Stenhouse, Bell, Matty D, and Custer. I don't know if maybe he's looking at maybe, for kind of maybe a rank them 1 to 4 maybe.
Okay, let's do that. It scares me to death, but I think it probably is Stenhouse at the top of that board, and then Christopher Bell, and I mean that is just based purely on place differential. And then I would probably go Matty D over Cole Custer.
I mentioned about a question that Andre put in, and we talked about this earlier, but for anyone who maybe wasn't here at the beginning of the show, we'll bring this up. Andre goes, more about point differential this week with not as many Dominator points available, one Dominator, maybe two. I know you talked about that earlier, but kind of rehash what you said a little bit earlier.
Yeah, for FanDuel, like if you're still playing on FanDuel, and this week is going to be a bit different on FanDuel than DraftKings. I think FanDuel this week, you're definitely not worrying about two Dominators. You can worry about rostering one. And I mean, we could very well see what happened at Watkins Glen a couple of seasons ago, where Chase basically led the entire race. He got out front, he played the pit strategy right, and he led, but like all of 5 laps. Like, it was one of those crushing things where if you faded Chase Elliott because he was on the pole, and up to that point, the pole sitter had done terribly at Watkins Glen. If you were trying to play that trend, I mean, after the first couple of laps, you were just turning off the TV and going to do something else. And we could see something similar this weekend. Chase has been that good, and with him on the front row, nothing is stopping him except just how aggressive Denny Hamlin wants to be. If you don't want to go a single Dominator on FanDuel, you could very easily play a place differential finishing position game with your drivers. And if you're playing head-to-heads, 50-50s on FanDuel, that's definitely the direction you want to go. Moving over to DraftKings, one Dominator lineups are probably going to be the focus of your rosters. You can look to two in tournaments, but you do that based on the idea that these chalky place differential drivers get stuck in the teens at the highest, and they don't end up moving up. They don't end up becoming good value plays. So necessarily you'll need the second Dominator in your lineups. But probably for me, for the majority of my lineups, especially for cash, it's a single Dominator plus trying to fit in as much place differential as I can.
Next up, it was a question. This was from Andre as well, asking he mentioned that Keselowski is only a GPP play for him.
Yeah, I can't find any cash viability for Keselowski as like your single Dominator. So he's a guy that you sprinkle in as a second Dominator play in GPPs. We looked at that ownership earlier, right now projected at 5%. So he's a guy that you don't have to do much at all to get over the field on that.
Next up, let's go over to Wyatt. He asked Bubba Wallace or Daniel Suarez.
10 out of 10 times I'm going to take Suarez. Wallace has a little bit of place differential starting 26th, but his finishes, I mean, it is a murderer's row. 25th at the Daytona Road Course, 28th last year in this race, 26th at Watkins Glen, 36th at Sonoma. And of course, that was his very first time seeing Sonoma. I mean, it was not good. And then 25th in this 2018 version of this race, and then 29th in Watkins Glen. I just do not feel comfortable with Bubba. He has not shown the prowess to be able to navigate these types of races, and it always feels like Bubba's just one shortcut away from crashing into a tire barrier.
Of course, this is the NASCAR DFS strategy show right here at Awesemo.com. I want to let you know about an offer we got over at Awesemo.com. For only $3.95, you can purchase an NFL Express, a weekly Express Pass, which now includes everything you need for NFL Showdown and single game contest formats. And of course, now that we're playing Tuesday Night Football, this is something you got to have in. For only $3.95, it gets you access to the single game player projections, ownership projections, and the top plays tool when you purchase this pass, in addition to the player rankings, lineup builder light, ownership rankings, and the top stacks express tool. It's our best offer for the Express Pass. So go over to Awesemo.com, sign up for a NFL weekly Express Pass for only $3.95. You can't beat that deal that we got going on over there. You're also at another question for you here was if you're going to roster any Kurt Busch.
Definitely no on FanDuel. Kurt's salary, it's still hanging up there. It's $10,300 on FanDuel, so that's a driver I'm not touching on DraftKings. like I think you can make a case that Kurt could end up getting there as a top five finish, but the last time that, yeah, in fact, the 2018 version of this race, he did come in fifth, and that year he didn't have a finish worse than 10th in any of the road course races, but he finished 14th in the Daytona road course, 20th in this race last year. I think Busch is just kind of in a weird spot. Plus, he won at Las Vegas. He is locked into the next round. So I mean, he probably genuinely does not care what happens in this race.
Yeah, I was just kind of looking at our projections here and kind of see some of these high price salary drivers and where they mention you mentioned about Keselowski. Alex Bowman under 10%, but he is 9,000 on DK.
Yeah, but Bowman's the classic case of looking at what he's done in the race instead of just how he finished. If you want to bet that the way that he's finished these races is more indicative than what he's done during the races, then he's a guy that you might be able to get on board as a top five finish. But I just feel better going up to Jimmy or going down to Boyer or even William Byron for that matter.
On the FanDuel side of things, what about Tyler Reddick at only 5% ownership?
Yeah, I mean, starting 16th, he gives you place differential. Yeah, he finished 18th in the Daytona road course race, but I remember him being up there in the top 10. So I mean, if Reddick can just basically do the same, and in his price range on FanDuel, that's really a kind of a dead zone that I don't think that a lot of people are going to want to end up going to.
Of course, everyone can get in contact with you all throughout the weekend over on our premium site channel for our subscribers. So if you didn't get a question in here on the show that maybe you think of after the show, I know you'll be in there. I'll be in there tonight for MMA. So, of course, we got the MMA Live before lockup here later on today, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. So you got to check out that. Anything else you want to mention, Phil, before we get out of here?
If you guys have access to NBC SN, which basically everybody should, unless you're watching your races on rabbit ears, watch the Xfinity race today, because I mean they're basically going to have the same, weather that we're talking about, the steady rain all day. Look and see how that affects these drivers. Now, granted, of course, these drivers are not near the caliber of what we're going to see in the Cup race tomorrow, but look and see how this rain is affecting drivers today, and that may change your outlook on what you want to do with drivers. Because if today is just an absolute chaos and no one's safe, then it may be a point tomorrow where I go back into Fantasy Cruncher and say I don't want anybody over 30%. I mean, I'm just going to take a wide shot at this.
We'll get this one last question here before we get out of here. Our favorite low-owned driver, a.k.a. sneaky play, a.k.a. dark horse, is it James Davison, or is he going a little higher up than that?
You know what? I think that if it isn't Davison, then you're probably either looking at Suarez. I mean, these guys, they know what they're doing on these road course races. Yeah, they may not have the greatest. They may not have the greatest equipment, but their talent in this type of race versus the field, it's that much better than probably 90% of the drivers.
And, of course, we appreciate everyone that tunes in here to the Awesemo NASCAR DFS Strategy Show. Before you leave, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, notification bell, so when you know a new show is coming here on Awesemo.com. So that's going to do it for this edition of the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show right here on Awesemo.com.